So I started with a nice ground gray color for my stain on the canvas. Used burnt umber, some ultramarine blue, and titanium white, which are my favorite three colors to create this gray ground coat. And we're just starting with some simple airbrushing, um, bringing in, using the background, of course, and not trying to cover it completely, but coming through with a little white and a little bit of blue and a little purple to start to form just some basic shapes, some basic cloud coverage to begin with. What I plan on painting here would be an eagle flying over some snowy mountain ranges. So taking my dagger brush and then a little bit of that gray mixture and a little bit of purple, which would be ultramarine blue, purple, burnt umber, and even a little bit of charcoal black to start to form my peaks here. I like these dagger brushes, these angular brushes. I can get the right, just the right angles that I'm looking for. And I'm just simply scumbling in real quickly these most distant mountains. I'll be getting those covered up with quite a bit of fog and low hanging clouds. But just wanted to bring in a couple different colors, a couple different values here, and work on that pretty quickly here. I've switched to my larger um, angle brush to get a little bit quicker covering over the canvas at this point in time. And now I'm just coming through and just adding a little bit more shadow. Um, as I mentioned, a lot of low-hanging clouds are going to be covering a lot of this, but wanted to get that kind of worked in. So I'm going back with my dagger brush and I'm just starting to form some really basic little snow caps, kind of skipping around using some of the brush strokes as a guide. And all I'm using here is just ultramarine blue with a little bit of titanium white. I just want to keep this definitely in a lot of shadow. This is not a lot of detail that I needed to put on this because this will be really the background. It's the most distant. So we're going to keep it fairly basic and simple, pretty muted. Going back with my small round brush, and I'm just sort of bringing in a little bit more of the detail for the smattering of snow that's just kind of bouncing all over this distant peak here. I'm adding a little bit more white here. I'm not trying to go really bright or intense, but I did want to bring in a little bit of contrast from that bluish color to a little bit more of the white. And I'm being pretty quick here. I'm still a little bit methodical, but holding my brush way at the very end of the ferrule and just trying to be pretty loose and pretty free as I kind of throw the snow formations in and around this peak. As I said, I didn't need to spend a tremendous amount of time on this as my distant mountain. Um, and so I'm going to come back now with my airbrush and introduce just a little bit of the low-hanging clouds. I'm using a little green and a little ultramarine blue with a little white mixed in there to spray, and just adding a little bit to the sky and then trying to get a good covering on this mountain. I could do this with a brush, but I just really like the softness that I can achieve with the airbrush, and call it cheating if you will, but I really like the effect that I can get. So just coming through here and just layering the color, I've come back and kind of brightened with a little bit more white in the airbrush and started to sort of form a little bit more of the shape in the clouds and in the fog. And now that I've got that kind of worked in, we'll come here to the middle ground and start adding the next layer of the peak. And I'm going a little darker here with purple, burnt umber, and a little bit of charcoal black to start forming that peak. And now coming here to the distant valley, this is, I wanted to get this worked in quickly before I added the rest of the forefront of the mountain, because it will be sort of in front of this valley. So this will be sort of the canyon floor, bringing in some of the snow, and started with white and a little bit of ultramarine blue, and then as I slowly intensify my color, I'm going less blue and a little bit more white here, a little bit more pure white, and trying to follow these angles is pretty important. I want to let the viewer kind of see that this is a valley floor, so following the angle upward toward the mountain will give that effect. So it's pretty important to follow those brush strokes and make sure that I've got the right angles in place. So just coming through here and softening it and adding a little bit more white. And this is a pretty pure white here at the very, very lowest part of the valley. And since I got that worked in, now I can start to add more of my mountain in the foreground. This is actually the mid-ground mountain. It's not even the foreground mountain quite yet. Now I'm bringing in some very distant pine trees. And this is just a pretty simple upward stroke with my small round brush. And just giving it a little bit of shape and form, but not a lot. Really the important thing here is that I want the viewer to just get a sense that these are distant trees. I've got to follow the angle that I've created with the snow upward toward the mountain. So these are kind of angled toward the peaks there in the background. And so we don't need to put a whole lot of effort or work in that, but it's really just to kind of fool the eye. In a couple of these, I stopped doing the simple upward stroke with my brush and do provide a very basic tree shape to some of these, just so that I can kind of reinforce what that is way down there on the canyon floor. Now coming through here, just to add a little bit more detail to this mid-range, this mid mountain range here, and using a little bit of my lighter color and introducing just a little bit of burnt sienna to get that kind of reddish effect. I even used a little bit of red and orange to go into that color. And then just coming back with my snow color, my blues and my whites. I'm really looking to add some contrast here. So I'll be bouncing around back and forth between my blues and my whites so that I can really identify the sunlit side of the snow on the mountain versus the shadowed side of the snow on the mountain. Coming back with my round brush, and I'm using pure titanium white and outlining kind of where the snow is falling into the cracks and crevices here. wanted to get all this worked in before we start getting busy with the most foreground mountain peak, which is what I'm starting here. So I'm using, my colors are ultramarine blue, dioxazine purple, um, and charcoal black with a little bit of white, and I even used a little bit of sap green. So I wanted to get this color quite dark to give the impression that this is the closest range. My colors are a little bolder, they're a little bit warmer, a little bit closer, and that's what helps me to give the indication um, of the closest peak. Now I'm underpainting in just white and ultramarine blue. This will be my snow that is creeping up the side of the mountain here on the closest range. So just getting that in real quickly, let that take a few minutes to dry, adding some highlights to my valley floor, kind of show that those are mounds of snow, and just to add a little bit more interest, a little bit more contrast by adding a little bit more highlight there with pure white and just a little bit of yellow mixed in to achieve that real crisp, bright white color. Again, just going through and kind of tweaking here, adding a little bit more highlight to my stones. Um, and I just kind of bounce back and forth playing with this just a little bit. You got to be kind of careful not to overwork it. Kind of messing around too much with it can actually kind of damage it. So trying to be a little bit cautious there, but just doing a little bit of tweaking so that I can sort of get the desired effect that I was looking for. Now I'm coming back with my blue and white for my snow shadow color here on the most close peak. Wanted to get that worked in real quickly before I brought in my most close peaks that will be coming pretty soon. So coming back with burnt umber and burnt sienna and some white to try to start achieving some of the stone and rock formation here. Making sure not to kill all my negative space here. I want some of that background base color on that mountain to show through. So just want to make sure that I'm skipping quite a bit and letting the dark show through. You'll see here in a minute after I add all this in, I wasn't overly pleased with its effect, and I do actually go back and paint over it and start over again. I just felt like my brush strokes were maybe a little bit too broad, and I needed to kind of tighten it up a little bit more. But I'll get that changed here in pretty short order after I add this initial first pass at the peaks here. So kind of coming back and adding a little bit more of my darks, pure black and burnt umber, to kind of form a couple of the cracks and crevices, get those a little bit more noticeable in there. And I'm just still kind of working here and layering and adding some of my highlights. So I'll come through and add my bright side of the snow, which is just kind of a dull white color mixed with a little bit of ultramarine blue. And then I'll slowly build upon this and bring in a little bit brighter colors, make it more intense with some white and a little bit of yellow mixed in on that. So I'm going back now and again adding a little bit more brightness, but as I mentioned, after a few more minutes here, I'll think to myself that I just didn't like it a lot. So the great thing about painting is you're in control, and if you don't like something, you can always go back and change it. And I tend to do that from time to time. I think we all, as we're experimenting and playing with colors and shapes and forms and contrasting and working on composition, sometimes it just doesn't look quite right. And one of the things that bothered me compositionally about that were some of the protrusions I have at the very lowest part of the mountain, kind of snaking into the snow. I felt it was a little bit too uniform, too thin. So I'll go back and change that too. I'll kind of fatten it up and kind of work on the composition on the very lowest peak right there. So still working on bringing in some more of my bright colors in the snow, and trying to kind of to work and figure that all out. So it's just a matter of just kind of playing with it sometimes. I don't always know where I'm going with what I'm doing. I have a loose idea of kind of where I'm trying to head with it, but sometimes it backfires, and I just have to be able to start over or cover it up, or keep working it until I figure out what I'm trying to do. So now it's just a matter of going back and adding some of the snow, and I think it's pretty close to this point where I realize that I kind of want to change it up and kind of start over. And I think I was much happier with the the closest peak after I went through that exercise. So these snow-covered mountains they're pretty fun. They pose an interesting challenge. There's a lot of detail that goes into them. It's pretty time consuming, but if you're just patient with the process, it's pretty rewarding uh, when you're done with it. So um, just trying to get that all worked in and figured out. I'm actually not a really big fan of doing snow scenes. I do not like snow, and I do not like winter personally. I struggle through it usually. So I'm just one of those people that I would be very happy with just one season, summertime only. But so I don't do a lot of snow scenes because they just psychologically make me feel cold. So I know that maybe sounds a little bit funny, but I still like to do them from time to time. I think it's important to be able to be really well versed in all the seasons if you're doing outdoors, and and just be a well-rounded artist anyway. It's good to do things we don't like to do. Definitely not my favorite genre, but I still I still work at it because I really want to be proficient in pretty much everything from nature and outdoors, seascapes, landscapes, portrait painting. I'll be doing a portrait painting here pretty soon. I've got a commission coming up for a portrait, so I'll be working on a video for that here pretty soon. But in the meantime, I just wanted to continue to kind of practice my snow scenes, snowscapes, the mountain ranges, and those types of things. Which again, I think just always trying to stretch myself and keep learning and growing. So I'm adding the little trees at the bottom. That's what you're kind of seeing me do here with my small round brush. I'm using my sap green, a little bit of dioxazine purple, making a really nice dark tone for the trees. And then I'll go back a little bit later and I'll just add a little bit of just pure sap green with some white just as a highlight color. And I'll add that color um, kind of just staggered and spaced throughout the canopy of trees leading up the mountains so that it gives it a little bit of color, a little bit of variety. So always looking at composition, always trying to think about what makes sense, what might look well, look right. Do I have too much empty space in some areas? Do I need to add a little bit of interest in other areas? So just kind of trying to think about that. And I'm going through and adding a little bit more of my light blue snow color into those dark crevices. So again, I can have that nice contrast between the sunlit side of the mountain and the shadowed side of the mountain. Adding a little bit more highlight color here. I'm using my favorite highlight color on when it comes to rocks or to dirt or boulders, mountains, things like that is usually a gold color, which my gold color is usually titanium white, cadmium yellow light, and cadmium yellow or cadmium red. And sometimes I might even add a little bit of orange to that. So that makes a nice gold color, and it's a good highlight color. I did add a little bit of extra red, and even use some burnt sienna, which has a lot of, it's a brown that has a lot of red in it anyway. So using quite a bit of burnt sienna to kind of get that reddish tone to the stone on the mountain. So just always kind of going back and adding more color where we need to with working with acrylics. In case you're not aware, they do dry a few shades darker. And in some things, I like that. I think it adds a good variety. But other times, if you're really trying to get a good, crisp, intense color, it can be a little frustrating. So this is where I decided, okay, I'm going to start this thing over. I'm not totally happy with how it's looking, so I just come back in with my real dark uh, umbers and siennas and purples and start to get that a little darker. And then down here, I'm really increasing the size of that boulder that is sticking, kind of protruding out into the snow. I wanted to kind of change that up a little bit more, and so just bringing in this base color real quick, and I'll let that dry, and then I'll go back and I'll rework it kind of more of the way I really wanted to see it happen. And I wasn't terribly dissatisfied with the first one, but it just didn't feel right, I guess, and I wanted to get it to feel kind of right. So while the underpainting on that mountain's still a little wet, I'm coming back and with a little bit of brighter browns and oranges and starting to kind of work in my highlights and slowly kind of work that in while it's still wet so that it can all sort of blend in nicely together. So again, coming back and adding my snow back in, starting with the shadowed side of that snow, and kind of getting it to transition well from the um, the hill and the snow mounds that are kind of blowing up into the boulders, and trying to get that transition nice. And then I'm just adding little boulders that are sticking out of the snow here and there. I thought would just add a little bit more interest, bring in my pure white. This is kind of a pure white color I'm using that I'm just kind of dancing and bouncing around again to just form my snow that's kind of laying within the cracks and crevices of this mountain. So as I said, you know don't ever be afraid to cover something up if you're not satisfied. It's part of the learning process. Sometimes when I do paintings, it's like clockwork. It's magic. Every stroke I make, every color I use, everything just seems to fall into place, and that's always nice. But it's kind of rare. Usually, I'm happy with some sections, just not so happy with other sections. Sometimes I'm battling something to get it to appear right. So just be prepared anytime you're painting that sometimes the canvas seems to fight you, the brushes and the colors seem to fight you. Um, but if you just have patience with the process and don't get disheartened, you can work on it. If you need to step away, step away. Sometimes stopping the painting and coming back another day gives you a fresh set of eyes. Okay, so I've gotten where I wanted to have with that peak, and now I'm going to start working on the eagle. So this color here is my white. I'm using ultramarine blue, and I'm using a little bit of burnt umber. And I'm going to get that kind of smoky grayish blue color, and that's going to be the underpainting for the feathers, the white feathers. And I'm doing the same with the neck, which is also going to be white. And so just a good little color to use as the shadowed color for making this three-dimensional. I'm using again my dagger brush to get the angles that I'm looking for. I like the daggers, they're nice and sharp and they provide really good angles. I highly recommend them, they're good brushes. Use them quite a bit. They're great for making the feathers. You can see how just a couple strokes and you can kind of get the shape of the feather. So the color I'm using here for the eagle is I'm using doxazine purple, I'm using burnt umber, and I'm using a little bit of charcoal black. But mostly it's my umber and then a little bit of the purple. I think that's going to be, those are my two primary colors I'm using mostly to form the underpainting for the dark feathers on the eagle. And I'll go over it a couple times since I'm painting over a lot of other background shapes and colors. I'll need to have a couple coats once it dries. I'll go back over it again with another coat of paint, and that way I can make sure that nothing is really showing through on the eagle. Some artists like to paint around their objects. Some, like myself, I prefer to just paint the whole background and then just use whatever happens to show through after that as I bring in my primary subject. So as a result of doing it that way, I do have to do a couple coats of paint to get that on. So I've got most of the eagle underpainted, getting in his little foot there, his little talon, and of course his beak. And now this is where I'm coming back with just more of a pure white. This time I'm using my angle brush, great brush as well. I love this brush, use it a ton. And I'm kind of trying to make sure I'm allowing a lot of that underpainting to show through. I don't want to kill that. I want to use it to my advantage. So starting with the tail feathers here and getting those drawn in. Same with my wing feathers, using just a lighter version um, of that dark brown that I created. Just kind of changing the tone a little bit, adding a little bit more white, a little bit more burnt sienna, and getting sort of those feathers kind of starting to get those to work in. So get that painted in, bring in the next layer of feathers. These types of birds, they have a couple layers of feathers, so just trying to kind of play with that, figure that out. Wanted to get the back wing painted in first because the forewing is going to be kind of in front of it, so all this is going to really more be in the background. So I just like to get the background kind of painted in first. Makes, obviously makes sense to do that, and then I can work on the foreground wing a little bit more. So it's just a matter of coming back and trying to get the right tones and colors and kind of give the impression of this being a wing on the bird. So I just have to play with it a little bit. Bringing in some of my highlight. This is, again, just using that lighter version of the brown, just adding a little bit of white. And using my round brush to get a little bit more of the detailed feathers in. I had to turn my painting over so I can get the right reach and the right angle to the feathers on there. So apologize for moving that canvas on you. Bringing a little bit more pure sienna on there. I wanted to get a little bit more color, a little more redness into the feathers, and add those highlights in. So it's just kind of going back and forth and playing with it, just like anything, just kind of playing with it, slowly building color. I like to start with my darkest colors and then slowly bring forth the lighter colors, and that's what helps to give it that three-dimensional effect. Now I'm starting to work on that closest wing right there, and that's why I wanted to get the background, the back wing in first, because I knew I was going to be painting this this foreground wing in right now, and trying to work on the shapes and make sure that I can get the right shape on that wing. And as I'm painting, I just keep kind of seeing little things here that I think I can do to kind of improve the look and the feel of the wing. Now this one's not nearly as detailed, it's more in shadow, so I'm using my dagger brush and I'm going into that lighter brown mixture, and I'm just kind of adding some little highlights and little tones that just give it kind of the impression that there's a little bit of texture, a little bit of movement. And it doesn't have to be anything really detailed. So it's kind of important to remember, what is in shadow and how much time you need to spend on it if there's not a lot of light hitting it. So that's kind of what I feel like kind of takes care of those feathers there. So not too much work had to go into that. Now I'm working on the head, and again, just kind of slowly drawing out these highlights, going between my white for the richest, boldest, and brightest portions of the head and then going back with kind of a blue brown for the shadowed side. So I'll be kind of playing with that, getting those feathers kind of worked in a little bit. Working on the eye now, and just used again my ultramarine blue with a little bit of burnt umber as my shadow color for this white part of the head. And then go back and bring in some more pure whites, and that's really what kind of helps to create that three-dimensional form on his head. I'm using yellow, kind of a pure cadmium yellow there for his eye, and then I'll bring in the pupil here in a moment, which is just a pure black. And there it is, so that's the pupil. And yeah, just kind of bouncing back and forth and kind of getting this thing to look more like an eagle's head, more feathers, and just play with it until I can sort of get the desired effect. So in all, it was a pretty fun painting. It fought me a little bit on the mountain, but I ended up kind of liking the second go around on that. So yeah, just completing the seagull now. I'm going to finish his claw in his talons, and then start working on that beak. I used orange and blue as the underpainting for the orange beak. That if you ever want to duller gray or have a good dark color to any color, just go to the opposite end of the color wheel, and you'll find it. And if you mix the complementary color with the true color you're wanting to use, then that'll help you to gray it out. So in this case, I knew I wanted to have an orange beak, so I went to grab blue as the complement color, mix that in, and was able to make that really nice dark orange color. And then I can go back with my whites and oranges and yellows and use that as my highlight color to start to help it to form that beak and kind of make it look a little more realistic. So the color wheel is definitely your friend, and it's important to use that color wheel whenever you can. I think that I use it quite a bit as I paint, as I'm trying to think about my colors and my values and everything that you need to think about as you're working on a painting. So just bringing in a little bit more detail here, a little bit more pure whites, and really just kind of get it a little bit brighter. Helps the realism. So now I'm just kind of working on scumbling in or dry brushing in a little bit more fog on the forefront of the mountain, kind of a little bit of a cloud coverage that's just sort of kind of creeping over, and improving a couple of my trees here. This is really just the final little part of this painting, is just the tiny details. And does anything jump out at me? Do I need to change anything? And with that, I think we can call the painting complete. I can go ahead and sign my name. As always, I encourage you to please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's Marc Harvill Art. That's Mark with the C. And really appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully you can visit my channel. I'm starting to get a good number of paintings, tutorial paintings in my channel that you can kind of watch all sorts of varieties of different things I've tried to do. I've only really been working on my YouTube channel for maybe the last 10 or 11 months, so it's still pretty new, and there's still a lot more paintings I need to add to it, but right now I've got a fair number. So appreciate you subscribing and maybe watching some of the other videos. So again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll look forward to doing another painting real soon. As I mentioned, I've got a portrait painting I'm going to try to do here, and we'll see how that comes out, and I'll try to do a video for that one as well. Thanks for tuning in.